I was recently watching a promotional video for one of JD.com's fully automated warehouses in China. It's mesmerizing. Thousands of robots moving in a silent, algorithmic dance, perfectly synchronized, creating a level of order that feels almost like a sci-fi utopia. In that environment, the biggest threat is a software glitch or a dead battery. But then I came across a police report from just outside Paris, dated December 21st. JD had brought that same future to France, but the local environment greeted it with something decidedly more primitive. A crew of masked, armed professionals didn't just bypass the security, they staged a tactical siege. They subdued the staff and calmly made off with 37 million euros worth of high-end electronics. The visual contrast is jarring. On one side of the globe, you have a society so orderly that high-value logistics are handled by defenseless machines in a high-trust vacuum. On the other, in the heart of Western Europe, you have a low-trust reality, where even an armored fortress requires a small army to defend it. It wasn't just a heist.
It felt like a physical rejection of modern progress. A high civilization enterprise, stumbling into what some are calling a semi-abandoned civilization. What's most unsettling isn't the crime itself, but the sense of Gothamization that follows it. We've reached a point where the state's defense mechanisms seem to have developed an autoimmune deficiency, prioritizing the abstract rights of the perpetrator over the basic safety of the commerce that keeps the lights on. It makes you wonder, what happens to a society when it becomes too sophisticated to protect itself? When the security tax of doing business in the West becomes higher than the profit itself? Are we just watching the slow, systematic looting of a fading era?
That opening visual is, it's incredibly powerful, and it really sets the stage perfectly for what we need to unpack today.
It's just such a stark image.
It is. That heist in Paris, the specific contrast between this futuristic automated machinery and just the blunt physical force used to get around it. It's a perfect lens for this whole discussion.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive is to really analyze that jarring visual contrast. We're going to explore how these fundamentally diverging definitions of public safety in the West and the East are completely reshaping global logistics and capital investment.
Right. It's not just an idea, it has real financial consequences.
Exactly. We need to look at the hard data on crime. We need to examine the different legal philosophies, the governance models behind them, and then check the market performance metrics to really understand this civilizational fracture that seems to be emerging.
And at its core, what we're really trying to understand is how this security tax, this cost imposed by rising crime in places like Europe, is actually accelerating the flight of global capital.
Pushing it toward environments that are, well, demonstrably high trust and low risk.
Precisely. This isn't just some abstract cultural debate. It's an economic differential that, it changes where hundreds of billions of dollars get invested. It determines where the future of our global supply chains is actually being built.
So we're going from philosophy straight to the balance sheet.
That's right. That JD warehouse heist, as spectacular and, as visible as it was, it's just one data point. It's one symptom of a much larger systemic crisis that's affecting the entire EMEA region. That's Europe, the Middle East, and Africa.
This is the cost of low trust.
It's the cost of low trust, and that cost is now measurable. And for a lot of businesses, it's becoming unsustainable.
All right, let's start there with the hard numbers on cargo crime. Because the scale of this across EMEA is, frankly, it's astonishing. This isn't just random theft. You're saying it's escalated into a full-blown boardroom crisis.
It has.
So when we look at the recent data, what does it tell us about how frequent and how valuable these attacks are getting?
The figures suggest something much bigger than just crime. It's like a fully operational, parallel criminal economy. I mean, if we just look at the data from July 2024 alone, it paints a really sobering picture.
Just 1 month.
1 month, across the EMEA region, supply chain thieves are making off with a staggering daily average of 532,000 euros worth of goods.
Wait, daily?
Every single day. Over €500,000 in stolen inventory that has to be factored into the risk model for any company operating there.
An average like that, it points to immense organization. This is not smash and grab stuff.
Yeah.
This isn't opportunistic.
Not all.
So what does the volume look like? How often are these organized groups hitting?
Well, in that same summer month, July, we saw 1,736 calculated reported heists.
Okay.
And those resulted in 16.2 million euros in stolen goods. But here's the part that's really critical, the context that makes those numbers even more disturbing. Those financial losses, They're derived from a tiny fraction of the actual incidents. We're talking about 5.1% of the total incidents that organizations even report to law enforcement and security firms.
So the vast majority just goes unreported. They just eat the cost.
They eat the cost or they deal with it internally. It implies that the actual annual drain on these companies, it isn't just in the millions. The current estimate is that it's over 8.2 billion euros per year.
8 billion.
That's a massive transfer of value from legitimate commerce directly into the hands of criminal networks.
When you look at that total loss, it's so clear this isn't petty crime. I mean, the size of the average loss per incident must prove this is a highly organized professional operation.
Without question. The average loss per reported incident is extremely high. It's sitting at 186,423 euros.
Just shy of 200,000 euros per hit.
Per hit. And that financial metric, that's the proof. It shows that these organized crime groups are operating with a level of efficiency, of planning, that honestly mirrors the multinational businesses they're targeting.
So they have inside sources.
They're leveraging industry insiders. They're using real-time shipment data. They are moving these stolen goods through established fencing and distribution channels that span entire continents. They're basically running their own parallel logistics network, but one that's dedicated entirely to extraction.
And what are they targeting? We saw high-end electronics in the Paris heist. But with that level of sophistication, they must be going after anything that's high value and easy to move.
Exactly that. Anything high value and easily fenceable. We've seen them target massive shipments of electronics, sure, but also premium pharmaceuticals.
Which are critical and expensive.
Terribly expensive. And also specialty industrial equipment, luxury consumables. These are all high-demand items that just disappear into secondary markets almost instantly.
You mentioned industrial equipment. That seems very specific.
It is. For example, in Germany, there was a break-in where the thieves were specifically there to steal 700,000 euros worth of carbide cutting tools. This is highly specialized niche equipment. That tells you these groups have specific insider knowledge about what's valuable and, more importantly, where it can be offloaded for cash. They're comfortable orchestrating these complex technical heists.
And on the other end of the spectrum.
Just as comfortable hijacking luxury goods, we saw 3,150 cases of premium gin stolen in the UK that was valued at 140,000 euros. It just shows their versatility across the entire value spectrum.
And the really alarming part to me is that this is happening in places we traditionally view as stable, predictable Western economies.
That's the most disturbing aspect. The UK, Germany, Italy, France, Spain, they bear the brunt of it. They account for nearly 90% of all reported hits.
These are supposed to be the anchor economies of Europe.
They are, and the intensity is just staggering. In the UK, gangs reported 620 thefts in July alone. That's an average of 20 heists every single day.
20 a day.
And in Italy, you had crews pull off a brazen 3 million euro cash-in-transit heist in Apulia. These thieves are organized enough to actively target holiday periods because they know security teams are running on skeleton crews. They're maximizing their probability of success. It's a business.
So the natural question is, why? Why this massive surge now? Is this just about security gaps, or is there some larger economic force driving this systemic breakdown?
It feels like the culmination of years of mounting multi-layered economic pressure. The surge we're seeing in cargo theft is deeply, deeply rooted in the historic inflation crisis that really gripped the region starting back in 2022.
Right. We saw the UK's inflation peak at what, 11%?
11% in October 2022. That was the highest since 1981. And then you have Turkey experiencing a staggering 86% rate. And even though those peak rates have come down a bit, prices have stayed persistently high. That's been eroding real wages and financial stability for years now.
So you have high prices, you have financially strained populations, which I assume creates a larger, more desperate pool of potential recruits for these organized crime networks.
Precisely. These sophisticated criminal networks can now exploit a much broader base of vulnerable people. We're talking drivers, warehouse workers, even security personnel, for inside information or for direct involvement.
The economic strain is basically making the supply chains permeable.
It's the perfect word for it. And then you compound this with external factors like the Red Sea shipping disruptions, forcing these costly detours all the way around the Cape of Good Hope. The supply chains get even more vulnerable. They're extended, they're stretched thin across these unpredictable routes.
Okay, this brings us right to this concept of the security tax. We're moving from the direct cost of stolen goods to this invisible, accelerating overhead that affects every single transaction. How do we even calculate that tax in
real terms.
This is where you see the physical results of low trust. That invisible security tax is this non-optional levy that gets imposed on all commerce. It includes, first and foremost, skyrocketing insurance premiums. That's the most direct financial hit.
The insurers must be panicking.
Insurers are classifying entire regions as high risk. They're forcing companies to adopt these zero-tolerance policies, and in many cases, they're just declining coverage entirely unless these stringent, very expensive security measures are taken.
And what are the daily operational costs beyond the insurance premium? I read about a logistics manager, let's just call him Mark, whose job has just fundamentally changed. It sounded less like logistics and more like he was running a military operation.
That's absolutely what it's become. For someone like Mark, his morning meetings aren't about maximizing throughput anymore. He describes them as military briefings. His core job has shifted from optimizing efficiency to purely defensive measures.
So the security tax is the cost of armed guards.
Armed guards, advanced surveillance tech, like real-time GPS trackers embedded in high-value shipments, costly two-driver protocols that are now mandated by insurers to prevent hijackings. Beyond that, companies are forced to implement randomized routing, frequent unscheduled stopovers. They're even deploying dummy shipments to try and confuse surveillance or attract false positives.
Wow. That's a huge shift in focus. I mean, you go from prioritizing efficiency and speed to operating in constant crisis mode.
Yeah.
The cascading economic consequences of that must be massive.
It is. Because when efficiency is sacrificed for resilience, the entire cost structure changes. Your rides are longer, your fuel consumption is higher, your delivery times are less predictable. And this is the crux of the civilizational fracture from an economic point of view.
Because capital doesn't wait.
Capital does not wait for social debates or political reforms. It flows ruthlessly towards safety and predictability and low overhead. So this security tax, it acts as an accelerant for deindustrialization.
So companies see the rising friction, the prohibitive costs in these low-trust European hubs.
And they naturally opt to physically relocate their investment, or at least redirect any new investment, to more predictable, low-risk environments. That looting of the JD warehouse, in this context, it's not just a crime, it's an economic obituary for the entire regional operating model.
The message is just brutally clear. When the security tax gets higher than the profit margin, the business will simply move. It's a cold, hard logic that goes beyond any ideology. And that leads us to the core philosophical divergence that creates this economic reality in the first place.
It does. And this brings us right to that underlying conflict. We have to compare the efficacy of Western liberal legalism against this East Asian communitarian model in defining what a modern commercial society even needs to survive.
Right. And one of the analyses we looked at used this really provocative term. We called it a civilizational AIDS paradox, an autoimmune deficiency in Western legalism. That's a very strong phrase. What does that mean in practical, legal, and social terms?
It suggests that the state's own mechanisms, which are often driven by this, intellectualized compassion that's rooted in liberal traditions, they reflexively prioritize the abstract rights and the societal root causes of the perpetrator
over the safety and security of the law-abiding citizen and their property.
Exactly. This is that pervasive sociological sympathy that we see. So instead of the legal system focusing primarily on punishment and deterrence, the conversation immediately shifts. It becomes about attributing the criminality to external factors: poverty, inequality, systemic disadvantage.
And what effect does that sympathy have on the criminal justice system's ability to actually function? Does this more intellectualized approach, does it paralyze the state's primary duty?
I think the argument is that it does. It paralyzes the state's duty to punish and, crucially, to deter. When the legal system is primarily focused on things like rehabilitation and root cause analysis, which, are laudable goals in themselves, but they are secondary to public safety, you start to see friction at every level.
You see things like low prosecution rates.
Pervasive low prosecution rates, bail reform policies that instantly return repeat offenders to the street, a reduction in proactive policing because officers start to fear legal or administrative reprisal for being too aggressive. The state's mechanisms of defense, they turn inward. They focus on self-critique and internal reform rather than external deterrence.
And that inevitably leads to the Gothamization of urban life that we talked about in the intro. If the state is constrained in its ability to defend its own economic base, then the very idea of inviolable private property
starts to ring hollow.
It does, because if every routine logistics operation, every corner store, every piece of consumer electronics, if it requires an armored fortress or private security, or just your own personal vigilance to protect it, then the very premise of a high-functioning civil society is failing.
The core compact is breaking down.
Exactly. The analysis suggests that the core compact of civilization, which is the state's monopoly on legitimate violence used to protect its citizens and commerce, is being undermined. These endless debates over criminal motives become a luxury a society can no longer afford when its vital economic infrastructure is being stripped bare and capital is already fleeing.
Okay, so now let's look at the other side of this fracture, the East Asian communitarian guarantee. I saw this story about an expat, we'll call her Sarah, who moved from a major North American city to Singapore. And she described this profound shock, not just at being safe, but at the lack of fear, even walking alone at 2 a.m.
Sarah's experience is the tangible result of this fundamentally different philosophy. The East Asian model, which was famously exemplified by Lee Kuan Yew's principles and has been adapted across the region, it defines public safety and social order not as secondary benefits, but as the fundamental human rights necessary for a commercial civilization to even survive, let alone flourish.
So for Sarah, the strict laws, the ban on chewing gum, the intense cleanliness, the pervasive security, that wasn't an intrusion on her liberty.
Not at all. To her, they were the invisible scaffolding that actually held up her personal liberty. It gave her a freedom from fear that she hadn't even realized she had lost back home.
This philosophy, it fundamentally shifts the emphasis from the Western focus on inherent individual rights to the individual's responsibilities to the cohesive communal structure.
That's the key distinction. It's a transactional guarantee. It's built on communal responsibility.
Yeah.
The idea is that citizens are expected to surrender their absolute personal liberty to commit violence or disruptive acts, and in return, they gain absolute societal security and order.
It's a trade-off.
It's a trade-off. And it's the freedom to conduct commerce, the freedom to leave your laptop unattended in a cafe, and the freedom to walk safely at night. In that framework, strict laws, even severe penalties for things like vandalism or certain drug crimes, they're often viewed by the compliant citizen not as some authoritarian excess, but as the highest form of human rights protection, because they ensure the stability that everyone relies on.
Order is the prerequisite for liberty.
That's it.
Now, if we look specifically at China, its governance system operates under what's called a Confucian paternalistic meritocracy. That's a complex concept. How does that philosophical tradition translate into the state's mandate for public safety and economic order?
The Confucian tradition, which has shaped statecraft in East Asia for millennia, it provides this deep historical root for this kind of pragmatic governance. It favors rule for the people by a competent, educated elite. And crucially, it strongly associates the government's political mandate with its competence, with its ability to deliver tangible results.
Primarily economic well-being and social harmony.
That's right. So the approach is intensely pragmatic and goal-oriented.
Which is perfectly captured by Deng Xiaoping's famous quote about the cat.
It is. It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. That quote just perfectly encapsulates the philosophy. Ideology, whether it's elements of Marxism, Leninism, or pure market capitalism, it's only acceptable as long as it benefits economic development and the people.
So the government is trusted to guide and protect, but only as long as it delivers results.
Exactly. And we've seen those results through decades of unprecedented economic growth and successful domestic management of large-scale crises. The state's legitimacy is earned through competency. The priority is the stability of the communal structure.
And this goal-oriented approach allows the state to adopt the principle of, well, whatever serves the purpose may be adopted.
Right, to ensure that economic machine runs smoothly and safely. When the government demonstrates competence in protecting the populace and maintaining order, which you see in the near elimination of major cargo theft and organized crime in their domestic logistics, the public consensus supports the high-pressure order needed to maintain that predictability.
So this philosophical difference, individual rights versus communal responsibility, abstract compassion versus pragmatic order, it sets the stage for the massive divergence in operational capability we see today.
It really does.
So if the East Asian model prioritizes operational security as the highest form of human rights, then this security gap isn't just theoretical. It's operationalized through governance and technological integration. How do these civilizational states maintain this high-pressure order, creating societies with dramatically lower security maintenance costs?
They do it through these comprehensive, technology-driven governance models. The entire idea is to create an environment where the cost of committing a crime is just so high and the probability of being captured is so close to 100% that the behavior is simply deterred before it even starts.
And we see the most comprehensive example of this technological grid in China.
We do.
With the system that's famously named Skynet, which is, that's a fascinating choice of name. What is the sheer scale of that surveillance system?
Well, China has the largest surveillance system in the world. It uses an estimated 200 million monitoring CCTV cameras, and these are integrated with facial recognition technology and massive data analytics capabilities, all working together for public safety and security.
200 million.
200 million. That's a system that's 4 times the size of the camera network in the entire United States. And on top of that, 8 of the 10 most monitored cities in the world are in China. So that just shows you the depth of this commitment.
And what's so fascinating is the lack of irony in naming it Skynet after the villain from the Terminator films, which is basically a global killer AI in Western pop culture.
And that name really reflects the East Asian view of this technology. It's seen primarily as beneficial for the public good. It's a powerful force that's specifically designed to improve safety and reduce crime. But this grid isn't just for street crime.
Right.
In a further display of this high-pressure order, which is rooted in that Confucian mandate for competence, sophisticated AI systems, like one called Zero Trust, have been successfully deployed to combat internal corruption.
To ensure the legitimacy of the governing elite themselves.
Exactly.
How does an AI system like Zero Trust even work? How does it monitor officials' behavior?
It operates by monitoring a huge array of transactional and behavioral data. We're talking asset declarations, property transfers, travel movements, patterns of interaction. The system uses AI to identify anomalies or sudden changes in lifestyle or resource allocation that might suggest some kind of malfeasance.
So the very existence of a system like that shows that the state prioritizes maintaining the integrity of its own structures. It recognizes that internal corruption is a massive threat to that high-trust, low-friction economic environment.
Absolutely. And this level of comprehensive technological grid management ensures that seamless operational security that's required for something like that robotic JD warehouse to even exist.
But this security isn't solely dependent on technology. It also relies on what we often call a high-trust society. What are the simple, everyday behaviors you see that reflect that high level of social trust?
The indicators are simple things that would be, well, unthinkable in the low-trust environment we discussed in EMEA. In high-trust East Asian societies, parcels are just routinely left unattended at doorsteps for hours, waiting for residents to come home. People use expensive electronics, like their laptops, to reserve a seat at a cafe while they step away for an extended period of time. This high degree of mutual trust, it isn't strictly imposed by some contract or law. It's based on a strong, prior moral consensus and shared cultural norms.
That shared social script, as it's called, must dramatically lower the cost of enforcement. If you trust everyone around you to adhere to the rules, you don't need to divert as many resources to security and vigilance.
Precisely. The core of this efficiency is rooted in that shared culture and social cohesion, which creates an expectation of predictable behavior. In low-trust societies, where interpersonal trust is low and, shared ethical values are fragmented, it makes forming and maintaining even basic institutions incredibly difficult.
And in China, this societal trust often extends to the government itself.
It does. The state retains full access to personal data, and this is a practice that is generally accepted by citizens who are accustomed to living in a secure society under a government that they trust to protect them, which of course is a practice that most people in Western countries would find shocking because of the implications for individual autonomy.
And this takes us right into the deeply divided public perception of technology, which seems to be split right along this civilizational fracture, a division between utopian and dystopian views of AI.
It is a stark contrast. In the East Asian view, which is exemplified by China, public opinion is largely supportive of AI technology. They see it primarily as an engine for economic growth and a force for achieving greater social good.
And the state-sponsored strategy and media reflect that.
They do. Surveys consistently show that Chinese respondents score high on AI acceptance and low on fear. They trust artificial intelligence to improve their lives and their safety. They see Skynet as a positive force.
Meanwhile, in the West, our popular culture is just saturated with caution. Western media, popular culture, it's heavily influenced by the cyberpunk subgenre, Blade Runner, The Matrix, which fosters this general, deep-seated distrust of governments and any technology that could be used for mass surveillance.
This dystopian view is rooted in European history, with totalitarianism, which calls for deep prudence regarding state power. And it's also rooted in a general distrust of government and tech leadership that's common in many liberal democracies. The fear of mass surveillance and privacy violations is paramount.
We saw that with the reluctance to adopt mandatory COVID tracking apps in a lot of European nations.
Exactly. And Western sci-fi often portrays AI as this insurrectional machine, the fictional Skynet, or HEL from 2001, a space odyssey that inevitably tries to overpower or kill humans. This fosters a deeply cautionary rather than a techno-optimistic sentiment.
And the legal frameworks really reflect this divergence. The European definition of privacy under GDPR, it protects individuals from both the state and commercial entities. It treats personal data as a fundamental right.
That's a crucial point. GDPR embodies that enlightenment value of protecting the individual against potential overreach. The Chinese privacy guidelines, however, they primarily target private companies and malicious agents, while the state retains the full necessary access to integrated data that's required for these high-level public safety and corruption monitoring systems like Zero Trust.
So the distinction is stark. One prioritizes individual autonomy above all else.
And the other prioritizes collective safety and operational efficiency provided by what is seen as a competent state.
It's important, though, to recognize that while the philosophy and the culture diverge so dramatically, the actual science and technology of AI and logistics are built on a shared global foundation.
Absolutely. Despite these deep differences in application and ethics, there is a common scientific ground. AI researchers globally are trained in a common curriculum. It's rooted in the scientific method, whether they're in Shenzhen or San Francisco. They collaborate extensively through shared publications and international standards organizations like the ISO and the IE.
So the actual tools and methods for building AI systems, whether it's for a robotic warehouse or a massive zero-trust grid, they're globally standardized and shared. The difference isn't in the science, it's in the political application and the underlying ethical mandate.
Precisely. And China's ethical guideline of open collaboration is actually consistent with this common ground. The standards are developed internationally, taking different cultural norms into account, but always adhering to technical rigor. For instance, ISO data security standards are widely adopted by major global cloud providers, including those operating within China. The technology is universal, the regulatory environment is culturally specific.
Okay, so this philosophical and operational divergence brings us back to the cold, hard logic of economics. This civilizational fracture directly dictates where capital and logistics are thriving globally. We can see this really clearly in the Agility Emerging Markets Logistics Index data. So where's the capital flowing and what metrics are driving those decisions?
Well, China remains the established powerhouse. It ranks #1 overall in that index. And the index assesses 50 markets based on logistics opportunities, business fundamentals, and digital readiness. But the most revealing story isn't who is #1. It's the surging high performance of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC countries.
The GCC is cited as a beacon of resilience.
Yeah.
Why are nations like the UAE and Saudi Arabia performing so strongly? And what does that tell us about the metrics that truly matter to global logistics executives today?
The UAE ranks #3 overall, and Saudi Arabia is #4. They've achieved this through massive, sustained investment in state-of-the-art infrastructure, high digital readiness, and really aggressive, business-friendly regulatory reforms. Their success is rooted in the strength of their business fundamentals score.
And that's where they scored highest globally.
They did, and that is the critical factor.
What specifically falls under that category of business fundamentals? Because this sounds like the perfect countermodel to that low-trust environment we saw in EMEA.
It is the direct countermodel. This category explicitly measures the openness, the robustness, the fairness, and the strength of the rule of law. It measures contract enforcement, anti-corruption frameworks, and the reliability of the police force.
This is where the absence of that security tax really starts to shine through.
Absolutely. They're demonstrating that stability and predictability are paramount. Saudi Arabia, for instance, has improved its standing dramatically by actively addressing corruption, strengthening property rights, and significantly increasing the reliability and professionalism of its police force. The UAE has transformed itself into a global hub for trade and finance, with its non-oil sectors contributing a huge percentage of its GDP, all built on a platform of predictable rule of law.
So we're seeing clear evidence of pragmatic, goal-oriented governance delivering these tangible economic enablers. They focus on structural reforms that lowered the risk for global capital.
Absolutely. The diversification strategies in the GCC, like Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, they prioritize massive infrastructure development. They're planning 59 major logistics centers across the country. They're future-proofing their workforce through education and training. They are building robust trade networks and modern urban frameworks to support non-oil sectors, and they're aiming for projected growth of over 4% in the coming years.
This focus on building a stable, predictable platform is why they're attracting capital that's looking for operational security.
It is.
And this all suggests a global supply chain recalibration. We're moving away from the old paradigms that were centered purely on the lowest price. Logistics executives are now prioritizing resilience over efficiency. What does that actually mean for where investment is going?
That is the major takeaway from all the industry surveys. The industry is no longer betting entirely on these single market strategies that are built purely for the lowest cost. They are strategically moving production and sourcing to balance cost with resilience and geopolitical risk. Over half of the executives surveyed 54% plan to move some production or sourcing out of China by 2030.
That's a significant increase from prior years.
It is. This trend is what we call decoupling or nearshoring or regionalization.
So if capital is diversifying out of China, where is this investment actually flowing? Who are the quantifiable winners of this capital shift?
Based on the total calculated inflows and outflows of investment interest, the biggest winners are North America, with a plus 12.9 score. Sub-Saharan Africa is at plus 9.9, and Southeast Asia at plus 4.9. North America is benefiting heavily from reshoring trends, driven by concerns over geopolitical stability and just the desire for proximity to that massive domestic consumer market.
And Sub-Saharan Africa?
Gaining traction due to low labor costs and a lot of untapped potential, driven by things like the African Continental Free Trade Area. And Southeast Asia, well, it remains a steady, cost-effective alternative to China. It boasts good infrastructure and political stability in key nations.
It's important to keep the nuance, though. While capital is diversifying, they aren't just abandoning China. Its net loss in this survey was actually pretty slight, which confirms it's still central to operations.
That is correct. China's scale, its established expertise, its deep industrial ecosystem, and its superior infrastructure. These things are difficult, if not impossible, to replicate entirely somewhere else.
So the strategy is more nuanced.
It's highly nuanced.
Yeah.
Executives are maintaining their presence in China for its unparalleled efficiency and existing infrastructure, while simultaneously moving to other stable regions for resilience and risk mitigation. They are building redundant supply chains, not abandoning the largest industrial base in the world.
Before we move to the final synthesis, we have to acknowledge the trade-off here. While the GCC nations and the East Asian civilizational state offer this superior operational security and lower security taxes, this high-pressure order often comes with restrictions on personal and political freedoms that would be, well, unacceptable in the West. Does the market care about those non-economic factors?
That's a critical point to raise, and the answer is complex, but it leans heavily toward pragmatism. While 80% of logistics professionals view things like trade protectionism and tariffs as significant obstacles, so uncertainty is a huge problem for them. When it comes to choosing a stable operating environment, the market prioritizes predictability and stability over ideological concerns.
So capital in this sense is amoral. It just seeks the highest safety-adjusted return.
It does. The prevailing market sentiment shows that nearly half of all respondents prioritize stability over pure cost-cutting. They're affirming their confidence in their current optimized setups in these stable regions. The need for predictability and reliability dictates that capital flows will increasingly favor environments where that security tax is low and the state is an unambiguous guardian of the economic base.
The market reward for high-trust societies, regardless of their underlying political philosophy, is immense.
It's immense.
So the lesson from that JD warehouse heist in Paris and from the cold data of these logistics indices, it's really synthesized in this divergence.
It is. The looting of a high-tech logistics hub in a European capital, it serves as this harsh economic obituary for an environment where the security tax has simply become prohibitive. While one civilizational model continues to prioritize these philosophical debates over the abstract rights of the accused and root cause analysis,
the other prioritizes a high-pressure, pragmatic order that guarantees public and commercial safety. And it holds competence as the highest virtue. In the brutal competition for global supply chains, the ultimate determinant for where capital lands, it's not democratic procedure or ideological purity, it's the cold, hard logic of operational security and predictability.
And that high-pressure order of the civilizational state is delivering a profound reality check to the West. It's creating a predictable, low-risk environment where the engine of modernity global logistics can continue to run smoothly. The physical flight of capital, as measured by that agility index, it's the market's ruthless response to the failure of the state to maintain a high-trust society.
The contrast we see between the frictionless algorithmic order of the East and the high-friction Gothamized reality of the West, it just shows that efficiency and security are the ultimate metrics that matter to global commerce.
And on that brutal balance sheet, the East is delivering a decisive reduction in operational risk, and that's making it the preferred destination for the next generation of global supply chain investment. The narrative of civilizational competition, it's no longer abstract. It's written in the language of lost inventory and predictable profit margins.